spoiler alert, as he just mentioned, he didn't really enjoy it, and we're going to kind of dive into
not a spoiler
why.
anymore.
Yeah, it's not a spoiler anymore.
Sorry.
So it's not a spoiler.
It's not. He already said it. I don't know why you said that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Magus Brothers. I am Tyler, and with me always is the lovely...
Hey, y'all, I'm Feyerbrand, and thank you for joining us on episode 10. I think we're on 10 now.
Yeah, 10.
Finally in the double digits. We've made it. We are officially a real podcast. Don't let any of the haters... Now. Yeah. All right, that's it. We're done. See ya. We quit. But all jokes aside, not really. We got something special for y'all today. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and let them know what's happening?
Yeah, so here on episode 10, we are joined by Naitor. He is on Twitter at Naitor5. He is joining us to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Naitor, tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the remake and what we're doing here.
Hey guys, I'm Naitor. I'm an artist from Peru. I'm also a game designer. I studied in college, and I'm a huge FF7 fan, and I want to talk about the remake with my friends. Because I didn't like it.
Whoa.
I know. Slam on the brakes, right? We had mentioned a couple of times in prior episodes that we were going to be talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake and bringing in somebody who did not enjoy the game. And then we were going to do an episode about somebody who loved the game from a perspective that is, one, not fair or my perspective, and two, a perspective that you may not have heard before. Naitor, while vocal and has a Twitter following with his art, is not necessarily a prominent figure in the Final Fantasy community as a streamer or content creator. So we decided to bring him on because we wanted to hear his thoughts and opinions about the game. We're gonna break the episode up into chunks and fail at staying on course because that's what we do. But let's start. Naitor, talk to us about your overall take on the game and why you didn't enjoy it before we dive into any one thing.
Okay, broad strokes, when the game sticks to the original and it's like how you imagined it, it's amazing. The character moments are great. Cloud is amazing. Barret too. Aerith, I love Aerith. But it goes on some Nomura-like tangents, like the Whispers?
Yeah,
the Whispers, right? And it introduces a whole lot of BS, and the levels aren't engaging, let's say. Feels very dragged out, aside from the fact that it's just the first 5-8 hours of the original into 40 hours, 30 hours.
What is your history before we dive into anything else? What is your history with Final Fantasy VII before the remake? I know you're a little bit younger and we don't necessarily need to dive into that, but when did you experience 7 for the first time?
I'm a little boy, okay? I played FF7 as my first and really only Final Fantasy aside from Bravely Default, which doesn't really count. In 2016, I think, my high school teacher recommended it to me, the psychologist actually. I loved it, played it over 100 hours. I'm currently wearing an Advent Children necklace, and my mom's ringtone is One Winged Angel for whenever she calls me.
That's... The fact that it's your mom is hilarious. That's great.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so needless to say, you are a big fan of 7, and you being young does not matter. I just didn't want to make it sound like we were judging you for not having played the game, way back when. It's great that you played the game at all, no matter what your age is. We love it. You love 7. You played it, sounds like about 5 years ago at this point. Did you know the remake was coming out before you played 7, or did you find that out after?
I watched the trailer and that got me interested. So I wanted to play the original before the remake. And then we went into that long wait, cancellation after cancellation.
That was painful. That was
horrible.
Okay, so we got some broad strokes. We got a little bit of background with Final Fantasy VII. So the first thing I want to address is the actual graphics itself. Now, I don't know how if you listen to the prior episodes, Naitor, because I think you were at that point trying to avoid spoilers. But Fayer and I personally loved the graphics, and I have talked with you off on the side a little bit, but you had some comments about the graphics. Talk to us about how you felt.
For example, the opening of the game is just amazing. The characters are super detailed, very well animated. The acting is great. The effects are amazing. But after you get out of the first level, the reactor, you go into the slums, and it's like they got a lot less attention than the Shinra environments. So like the main characters look amazing, but the NPCs, for example, look very early PS4 days. And for example, the backgrounds in the slums look awful. Very low res textures.
I can agree with you there.
So I openly admit that I am not I'm making up the term graphic hound. I am not somebody who cares incredibly much personally about graphical fidelity. Like, there were points, especially in segments of the game, where you're like above Midgar, like messing with the lights up there, and you look down, and it was very like, obviously I was like, oh, the renders or whatever the term is there, like for the slums down when you're above them, doesn't look super great. And a lot of people commented about
that was a picture,
but I didn't know the terminology. Like,
it was
I was
very
just like
2D.
Yeah, I was just like,
yeah,
this
it was
doesn't
just
look great.
a JPEG.
There were a couple of points with like doors and stuff like that but I was never pulled out of the game, and I didn't notice this until I watched Tim Rogers' video about like his 5-hour review of Remake. And
oh yeah, I watched that.
Yeah, and like since I've gone back and played, I have noticed it, but they reuse NPC, like the skins, or like the actual like character model, I guess is the term, so much for different NPCs that like when I go through the game now, I'm like, oh, that NPC is wearing this, is the same exact model that I was just saw around the corner, and like they're just like jam packed everywhere. So I have noticed that.
So it was almost like they gave the illusion of a lot of people there, when in reality it was just a bunch of reused assets that they're copy and pasting all over the place. And like if you just glance by, then yeah, it looks super full. But then when you start looking into it, you're like, this same dude is you can see him 3 different times throughout the one slum screen, and you're just kind of like, well, I don't know if that's laziness, or if, you know, they were running out of time and they had to hurry up, or I don't know. But
okay, so that happens in pretty much every game. There are a few exceptions, like Breath of the Wild, for example, where the characters are actually Miis, so they randomize Miis and they map each hairstyle, for example, to a different 3D model, so they have variety. But most games reuse characters. Like, for example, The Last of Us Part 2 has a lot of reused characters for enemies. Same for, well, Uncharted, Resident Evil 2, GTA.
Like from like an
Everything
enemy perspective, I feel that's very common, even within Final Fantasy games, of reused assets for enemies, and they'll just like recolor them or something like that. I just felt it was kind of weird with NPCs. But then again, you are a game designer. I am some random dude on the internet. So
yeah, and
what do I know?
Bother me. I didn't even notice it until I watched somebody else's review. So like from my perspective, I was like, clearly this worked, because like Midgar felt flushed out, you know, from a lived in standpoint. I'm seeing all these people. It wasn't until it was pointed out to me, and then I was like, oh, I see it a lot now. You know, it was like when you hear a word when you find out what a word means, and then you feel like you hear it everywhere, that type of thing.
Oh my God, yes. But
Anyway.
I actually noticed this in pretty much every game ever since I was a kid. I don't know why. I'm just very aware of everything around me. So I've always noticed these things. So I'm used to it. I didn't notice it that much on FF7. It was like, oh, okay. That's a game.
Yeah, you sound like you're jaded to it, whereas I tunnel vision video games. I generally ignore all the noise in video game, like everything around it. I just ignore it all. I don't look for the details. I don't have an eye for that. I leave that to other people.
Yeah, the same. I don't have the.
Yeah, I wish I didn't.
You want to be a little more smooth brain.
I just want to enjoy things, but I can't enjoy things.
My attention to detail is too much. I can't enjoy things.
It's ruining all these video games.
It's actually called Designer's Curse. It's a thing.
Designer's Curse, yes.
Yeah, because whenever we play a game, we're always looking at things like, oh, how did they do this? Oh, look at that guy. Huh. I like this.
I
Then
can
you jot down
100%
some notes.
understand that because, like, a little background on me, everybody. I'm an aircraft mechanic. When I go and look at an airplane and I come up behind somebody else that performed in maintenance, I see everything they did wrong. I feel like, obviously, I don't know video games well enough to do with that, but like what I've been doing for the last 15 years, I can pick out every last little detail. So I know exactly what you mean, just in a different way.
So what else did you feel about, or how else did you feel about the graphics? I know we kind of went off on a tangent there as we want to do, but talk to us a little bit more.
For example, in combat, sometimes it's a mess. You can tell apart anything. There are way too many Unreal Engine particles, and it's a mess.
I actually am going to agree with you. Like having seen like gone into photo mode with like the PS5 mode and stuff like that, or trying to pay attention to certain things, it does. I don't get me wrong. Like, I'm all for flashy combat, but I have to agree that sometimes it feels like there's just so much particle effects that it makes it hard to see what's going on. And I truly didn't notice it until one, photo mode, or two, my kiddo likes to play Remake a lot, and he does this thing where he loves to, as soon as combat starts, he'll like go to select an action in the ATB to slow everything down, and he'll literally just like let Cloud perform Braver on slow mode. And I just sit there and I'm like watching all of these particle effects, and I'm like, there is a lot going on sometimes for like just like some simple moves.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of on the fence with that one, because while I agree that, you know, with an action combat game, you kind of want, you know, your battles not to be so busy, so that you can time your moves better because you can see things more clearly. However, on the flip side, I like pretty colors. So I like all those particle effects. I'm like, ooh, ooh. But I get what you guys are saying.
Yeah, I just wish there was some more balance. For example, Bayonetta has a ton of particles too, but you can read everything.
Okay, I could see that.
They just need to fine tune it more. I mean, this was part one, and
maybe the real Final Fantasy VII remake was the friends we made along the way.
I say that a lot. I mean, because Fair and I, even though, you know, we'll throw this in at the end, but like, you know, Final Fantasy Remake got Fair streaming, and then through that met you, and then you became our friends. And, you know, like there's just so many people we met because of the remake that like, no matter how I feel about this game or how Fair is kind of sometimes about it, like we love it because it altered the course of our lives, but
drastically.
Yeah, drastically. We'll talk more about that at the end. But anything else you want to add in for the graphics, Naitor? Please continue.
The PS5 upgrade wasn't that good, actually.
What?
Yeah, that's a huge hot take, because even Digital Foundry says it's amazing. But there are still very low-res textures everywhere. You know how they supposedly fixed the floors in the slums? Because like you had one tile that was high res and the other one that was low res.
I have not gone back to play that part, so I'm not going to say yes.
If you look at the floor, both in the PS4 and PS5 version, you will see one section of the floor that is higher res than the other one. It was super low res on PS4. They increased the resolution for some of those tiles on PS5, but there's still you can notice there are still lower res.
No, I actually know what you're talking about, because there's a side quest you have to do where you have to find those cats. And when you go and you zoom in on one of the cats, when you find them, that whole floor area right there, like I think it's supposed to be a puddle with some trash in it or something, but it just looked so PS2 like that it just looks so crummy. And I'm just like, and even on PS5, like I went and looked back again on the PS5 to see if it looked different, and it still looked super crummy. How, like, really the big thing about the PS5 for me was the 60 FPS, because when I played this game, I played it on the base PS4. I never got the PS4 Pro experience. So my first time on the PS5 was in 60 frames a second, and that alone was worth the upgrade for me.
You know, the big takeaways with the going to the PS5 version was one, that 60 FPS, and then seeing the like light reflections, the ray tracing and stuff like that, especially like when you're in Shinra headquarters and you see the lights reflecting off of things, was super cool.
Wait, it doesn't have ray tracing.
Am I using the term? Not ray, sorry. not ray tracing.
No, those are screen space.
Okay, yeah, just the better lighting in general, like seeing the lights, like actual light reflections off of other windows and stuff like that. Like the lighting was just so much better, and seeing reflections off of things, like the additional fog effects and stuff, like that looked also much better.
Yeah, the volumetric fog, that's amazing.
Yeah, like that all looked so good that I was just like, oh, this is great. That I didn't even notice like any like additional low res textures that were just like hanging out. But I think it wasn't until you posted something, Naitor, on Twitter, because you're outspoken, and it was a picture of something, and I was like, oh, I would never have noticed that. I would have been too busy looking at everything else.
I don't remember what it was, but you know what was the first thing I checked?
What?
The potion vending machine.
I was gonna say I think it was a vending machine or like a music box or something.
The text is very pixelated.
I never noticed.
It's like, wow, probably like 64 pixels image. And they didn't fix that on PS5. Actually, none of the things that Shinra prints aren't pixelated.
Maybe that was on purpose.
My headcanon is that Shinra is so evil, they want to save up on ink and stuff, so they just print everything low res.
Exactly. Like maybe that was on purpose. They're so cheap and crummy.
Evil.
So it sounds like your abbreviated consensus is, while the PS5 upgrade did upgrade and do a lot of cool things as far as like 60 FPS and all that, like there are still so many texture issues that they never even addressed.
Yeah, basically. I have something that's very, very stupid.
Okay.
And that's that you can even now on the PS5 version, I don't know if it has better 3D models. You can see how Tifa's chest has jagged edges when she's on a profile view. And I always notice that.
I mean, there's a joke in there somewhere, but
yeah, I'm treading on thin ice here, but yeah.
Okay, so just
her chest looks kind of low poly.
Okay,
is it just staring at her chest?
Just a little bit. Could do with a few more polygons.
Did you notice it with any other characters or just Tifa specifically?
Actually, most characters, but Tifa's is the most prominent.
Okay, so gonna go from graphics to talking about actual general, and this is like a really broad term, so I recognize it's going to encompass a lot of things, but like the gameplay itself and actual mechanics of it. We can throw in like level design, that type of things in there. But the gameplay itself, how did you feel about it?
I like it in concept, like action game stuff. Pretty cool. Mixed with some turn-based stuff. Cool. But the execution is a bit meh. Like, for example, your characters are stuck to the ground unless there are flying enemies. If the game let you jump, you could do combos like in every other action game. And that's not a thing for some reason. It's a bit weird because sometimes there are aerial enemies and you can't jump until your character decides it wants to jump. And I always end up pressing X to jump, but it only opens up the action menu.
And now that I'm thinking about it, while aerial combat was improved with Yuffie, with her story, she doesn't actually, correct me if I'm wrong because my memory is atrocious, guys, but like you're still not making her jump. It's not like a command to make her jump, right? Like she's just still just jumping after aerial enemies, even though that once you're in the air, you can stay in the air quite a bit longer and do cool aerial things.
Yeah, they pretty much improved in intermission. They improved aerial combat by just making Yuffie a long-ranged character. Like that was it. They didn't really change or improve upon the main reason why aerial combat was poor in the remake to begin with, which was the fact that you don't have a jump button. Like they just gave us the illusion that they fixed it by making her long-ranged, and they didn't fix it. They sort of like put a Band-Aid on it. And it's like, well, this is good for the DLC. Part 2, who knows? Cloud's going to throw his sword or something. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much that. It's a bit off, especially since weapons have that stat about aerial combat, like air attack plus, but you can't use it in most fights. So I don't know why it's even there. And speaking of flying enemies, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I was going to throw in that I would love for them to fix this. And like, because you're right, like even on weapon design, there is actual aerial damage bonus, but like again, you can only use that when you jump into the air via an enemy command or via an enemy being up there. You don't actually get to control or with a jump button that you're going to do aerial combat. And I'm hopeful, like I would love for them to fix that in part 2 and be like, yeah, just add jump and then add aerial things. But then I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be weird that like suddenly in part 2 you can jump, but they don't retroactively fix that for part 1? That would be weird.
Yeah, that's the problem with these sequels. Like, for example, The Last of Us. That's why they're supposedly doing the remake for the first one, because the gameplay is completely different.
Tyler, I know we made a joke. About Final Fantasy VII Remake remade, but who knows? This might happen.
They're gonna release part 2 and then a remake remade version where you can jump.
Oh God, my nightmare.
The question is, will they fix the story? Who knows? I doubt it.
They seem dedicated to the story, but we'll get there.
They're all in, man. They're 100%.
Oh man.
There's no way they're back. There's no way they're going to go into part 2 and be like completely forget about the whispers and be.
Yeah, well, that's why they're doing Ever Crisis.
Yep, they're like, here's Ever Crisis. But anyway, back to gameplay and mechanics and all of that. So you talked about combat a little bit.
I have one more thing about aerial combat.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're scaling the tower, where spoilers, Jesse dies and all that. There are some flying enemies that like to go outside of the ledge.
Oh my God,
and you can't hit them. And I was stuck there for 3 minutes
trying to get ATB to use the spell.
Oh my God. No, because I used the spell and it hit the little fence.
Oh no, that's even
5
worse.
times.
Oh God, that's awful. I did have moments like that.
I actually messaged Tyler when I was there. I was like, dude, I'm waiting.
Just put the controller down, go make a sandwich, come back.
Yeah, that particular part, because of the way the like level layout is, does make that very difficult if they're just like not coming in and they're just hanging out of range.
See, that's when Cloud needs an ability where he like boomerangs his sword at people and it comes back, or Tifa chucks out a Kamehameha or something.
Chi blast.
Exactly. I mean, she's a monk. Exactly. No.
Anyway,
I feel your pain. Climbing that tower was probably the worst segment ever.
No, that was the train yard.
Oh, don't say that. I love that.
Like outside the train yard. Oh my God.
Oh man, I remember. I want to go off on that tangent. Anyway, gameplay, mechanics. Keep going, Naitor. Keep giving us stuff.
Okay, so the game has an identity problem where it doesn't know if it's a turn-based game or an action game. So it kind of tries to do both and fails miserably because, example, you have that option that lets your characters attack automatically so they deal some damage because the enemies have way too much health, especially bosses. It's like the equivalent to the time bars in the original, but there the enemies had less health. So it kind of accounts for that. But if you have that off, you're screwed. But it's not fun to have it on, because you're not doing anything.
Yeah, I almost feel like that setting was... It does make sense. I feel like that setting was added for...
Purists?
Yes, I feel like it was added for purists or for people who wanted the game to be easier, to where like they didn't have to move their character around and like dodge things. Like it was just like that mode exists, so like that character would just auto attack and then block and like put the game on training wheels, basically.
Yeah, but the AI isn't that good, so you still get hit.
Oh my gosh,
you're better off just moving the stick. Yeah, and that Sonon does nothing.
I know,
unless you do the sync.
And it doesn't make any sense because you only had control of Yuffie. You'd think they would have tuned up Sonon's AI to make him more of a partner rather than just a dude you wait until you use the sync attacks with. Because he was just like a meat shield at that point.
Yeah, he just revives you.
Yeah, the AI is so bad.
Yeah.
So overall, would you say that you did not like the combat, or you did like the combat, or you were just kind of about the combat?
It's a mix of liked and hated, because sometimes it's pretty cool, especially at the beginning where you're just slashing Shinra troops. It's a lot of fun. all that entire opening mission is amazing. I love it. Then the game goes downhill because they bring in aerial enemies, enemies with shields, stun enemies, bullet sponge enemies. And it's like, dude, you're telling me, please don't play our game. Our game sucks. You're gonna get bored. Play something else.
I think Feyer and I talked about how Chapter 1 was, I don't want to say misleading, but it was misleading to a lot of people because the demo was essentially Chapter 1 with like a cutscene or two removed. And people played it and were like, oh my God, this is going to be great. But then you hit Chapter 2 and then Chapter 2 is immediately like, okay, here's a bunch of new stuff and we're going off the rails like immediately. And Chapter 1 is so faithful that I could see it being kind of misleading.
Especially since they didn't say they were going to change the story. I mean, they kind of did, but I never expected something like this.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, marketing, like we knew whispers were coming, but like we didn't know how and what all was going on until we got the game.
Yeah, it was a very monkey's paw situation. Like, you get FF7 Remake, but it's not the remake you wanted.
I almost feel like this is, some people might think this is just them spitting in all of the fans' faces. Oh yeah, you're going to get it, but you're going to hate it. So shut up.
And we are, we are talking with somebody who didn't like it. And, I don't know if you truly hated it, Naitor, but, we'll get there at the end. But, we are talking with somebody who didn't like it. And we'll be talking with somebody who loved it. It was a very divisive title, whereas I feel like for the most part, there's no way around it. Final Fantasy VII is like one of the most beloved games of the entire franchise. And I don't really know most people, and not just the franchise, but one of the most beloved games of all time. There are not many people who dislike 7. You'll occasionally run into people who are like, I feel like 7 is overhyped, or people love 7 so much that they ignore. Yeah. Or 6 is better, or like 10 is better, or, it's too hyped. It's too cool to love 7. But like, you never really find anybody who like 7 sucks. Anyway, more about gameplay, mechanics, level design. Hit us with whatever else you got, Naitor.
There are a lot of hallways with nothing. You just walk in a straight line, following the map or the compass up there, and you get a few enemies here and there. You mash square or hold it. Move to the next empty hallway. Do the same thing. Hold triangle for a lever that takes 5 seconds. Move into the next room and rinse and repeat for 30 hours.
Now, do you feel like, because this is something that I think Feyer and I have talked about, but do you think that this will be something that obviously as we transition into whatever version of quote unquote open world they do with part 2, are you excited to see how they handle that? Because obviously with Midgar, like Midgar's a city, and they very clearly did not let us explore all of Midgar. So like they put us on rails and put us in hallways and put us in buildings and that type of thing, or, and it was all the illusion of a hallway, basically. How do you feel about that? Are you hopeful that part 2 addresses this differently?
Man, I hope. I have no idea what they're going to do with the open world. I doubt they're going to do an open world. Heck, in intermission, the ending cutscene, they already skipped a whole portion of the open world.
Yeah, I'm curious where intermission is going to take place, or not intermission. Geez, part 2 is going to open up and take place because we got to sprawling world outside of Midgar, but like they do travel a little bit. Is it going to drop us out in front of Calm, and like make us go right into Calm? Is it going to open up with the Nibelheim flashback? But very quickly, no matter where we're actually at, there's no way they can skip the open world aspects of it. Like very quickly, we're going to find out what they're doing with it. I mean, they could. I just can't imagine how they're going to do it.
After the flashback, they can just be like, all right, well, pay your taxi fare and go on over to the Chocobo Ranch.
Yeah, I mean, they could. But
what if you get a map?
I feel like with you and I talking, like, I think 12 is the example you used, and I'm going to use the example for like 14. I feel like they'll do zones where it's like real big and open, but it's not necessarily like an open world. It's just these big zones. But who knows? I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, that's what the original was. It was just
that's true. The original was basically that.
Big one,
you
open
had the
area.
Hub, but how will they do that open world exploring? Because you had the chibi character measuring, I don't know, feet, 100 meters, walking around, being the size of an entire city.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair. Who knows? It's just that's pure speculation territory there. Uninspired level design with Remake, as I think what you're saying.
That carried over to Intermission too. So here's the thing: walking into a room and pulling the only lever that's there isn't a puzzle. So why even have the lever?
I always thought it was like, especially the ones where you have to like hold it for like 4 seconds. I always just assumed it was like one of those like hidden things where it's like you do this while the next area behind it loads type of thing, and they like hide it behind that. But I don't know if that's accurate.
I don't think so, because sometimes it would still need to load. I actually have no idea, because, for example, on PS5, Intermission is exclusive to PS5. So PS5 has the SSD loading, so they wouldn't need to do that. It would be instant loading.
That's fair.
Feyerbrand.
Damn it. Anyway, do you feel like Intermission improved at all with the level design? And the reason I'm asking is because one thing I enjoyed about Intermission was how it played into Yuffie's ninja-like strengths with the traversal, with the like climbing the grates and then using the weapon to like spin things and like, you know, kind of giving us that, what's the word? Vertical level design that was pretty absent in Remake, aside from like, oh, here's some ladders to go up and down. Like Yuffie was able to add a certain like traversal that wasn't there before, and it was kind of fun. Do you feel like that was an improvement, or do you feel like it was just kind of eh?
It was good the first 2 or 3 times, and then it got very old, because you still need to, for example, when you need to go up, you still need to slowly climb. So again, they didn't add a jump button. They're just contextual interactions. So you have an arrow and you run on the wall, but it's very limited, and they use it way too much in the same area. So it gets boring.
I feel like it was like, oh, here's this new cool thing that we can do with Yuffie, and we're just gonna like jam it into these 2 chapters as much as possible, and like maybe down the road, whenever we're with Yuffie, you know, we'll see it a little bit because it'll like shine and highlight her. But like I could see this like, all right, here's this new thing that you found out that you just added in a bunch, and it's kind of getting old.
Yeah, it ends up being another time waster. Like when Tifa is walking on the lights at the Shinra building.
You think it slows the pacing down?
Yeah, it completely kills the pacing. And it's something I like to call intense gameplay, because you're just holding one direction, watching a very slow animation, doing nothing else. You don't even have to think.
I actually complained about this in one of our previous episodes about those exact segments where they force you to slow down and walk to your next, point of interaction for really no other reason, for like really no reason. And it annoyed me to no end, and actually made me put the game down on like my 4th or 5th playthrough, because I was so annoyed with those segments.
Yeah, I could see like there's a certain... I am somebody who likes to immerse and like see everything, even if I'm not paying super close attention to detail, as we have talked about with like NPCs. And so like the first time you do those segments where they force you to slow down, which I am going to just assume is to like, oh, take in the environment and really observe everything. Like, granted, we can talk about them forcing you to do that and not giving us the option, but I liked it the first time, but having to replay the game, or not having to, but choosing to replay the game many times and then being forced to like do those things every single time definitely gets old.
Well, yeah, because those slowdown segments, if they're like forcing us to slow down for the purpose of admiring the environment, that's just taking away the player's agency and, making us sit through a movie rather than something interactive. And I found it irritating beyond everything.
Yeah, there are 2 things here. This is going to sound a bit cynical, but I think I know why they did it. And it was to pad out the game to justify the $60 price tag. Because, yes, it's a remake of the old game, but it's just the first 3 hours or 5 stretched out. So they need to justify the the content in the game however they can. So they do bullet sponge enemies, long hallways with nothing, and they make you walk.
So you're saying like all
a lot of games
added together pads the game length.
Yeah, it's like, look, guys, we have 40 hours of content, and you just have 15 hours of actual content, and the rest is just time wasters.
Is there? I want to add on to that, but is there anything else you want to talk about as far as like, you know, mechanics, gameplay, that type of thing?
No, I have something about the level design.
Okay, yes, hit us with it.
Okay, so those areas where you just need to walk slowly to the next dialogue. A lot of games do that, but for example, again, bringing up The Last of Us, when you have those, you still can explore a little bit. You can loot the drawers. There are a few optional areas. You still have your agency. You can explore. You can find things, find new dialogues. But here, you just walk in a straight line, doing nothing. You just push the stick and that's it.
So it's less that they force you to slow down. It's just that they force you to slow down. And in this context, especially with Tifa, with the monkey bar aspect, when you're in Shinra, yeah, you get to go over and get like her weapon the first time, like because you can pseudo explore, but that's like the only area that you can like go over to. Yeah, but it's so slow. And it's slow, and there's no dialogue. There's no other agency. It's literally just this not super great puzzle that is monkey bars and like nothing else. Whereas it sounds like in The Last of Us, you know, part 2, yes, you're forced to slow down, and a lot of games do that, but you usually get to do other things when you're forced to slow down. If it's going to make you listen to dialogue and do these character development moments like loot drawers or do some slight exploring, which this wasn't the case.
Yeah, and one thing about the fans part with Tifa, the ludonarrative dissonance there is funny because in combat, she can jump high up in the air, punch a few times, like 8 seconds airborne, but here she can jump what's essentially just a 2-meter wall.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many games and movies and stuff like that where it's like, I mean, I don't know if it was Fair, because Fair and I watched the She-Ra show on Netflix, but it's like, oh, how strong is this character? And it's like, well, they're as strong as the story needs them to be in this exact moment. And
yeah,
there's so much of that in so many games and movies. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like Kratos with a wooden door. You need a key.
You're like, really? I've killed gods and I need a key to open this door.
Yeah, you need a key. That's how it works.
I have a 7-foot sword. I can't cut down this wooden door. Come on, man.
Yeah, and it's like that's how games are. When it's a time waster like this, because it's like 5 minutes on those lights, it's annoying.
I agree. I hate it.
You're just like, why? The original didn't do this, so why do we need this? You're just padding.
Yep. Yeah. I felt like as somebody who loves, and very unabashedly, and again, we're not here to change your mind, Naitor. We're taking your input and like discussing it.
Good, because you won't.
I know. But I am somebody, as you know, who completely and absolutely loves Remake. And the part where you are above the plate and you're not above the plate, but you're like at the top of the plate, whatever, and like turning the lights off, that part was probably the only time in the game where I was like, this padding is very annoying. I did not like the level design of that area. I did not like any of it. I was just like, I do not like this chapter.
Yeah.
And so I'm with you there. And I love the game. But the one thing I wanted to say before we move on to a different topic was that, you know, I feel like some of the things you're saying about the padding, the different ways that they pad, whether it's through level design, pulling levers, forcing you to slow down, all of these things we're talking about that essentially created padding. It's just one of those things that goes to show, quote unquote, where it's like, if you loved the game, you mostly ignore the padding. You loved that this game was long, you loved it, but if you're not enjoying the game, the padding is glaring. Like the way they padded it is just so obvious and painful.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Shifting topics, and this is one I feel like I haven't even talked with you about on the side, Naitor, so I'm kind of really curious what your stance is this is going to be. is how did you feel about the music in Remake?
Ooh.
The remake, I'm sure you're aware, Remake won awards. Like a lot of the awards it did win was around the soundtrack and around the music. So like a lot of people love the music, but how did you feel?
I really, really like the music, especially the theme Hollow. I love that song.
Okay. I didn't know what to expect, but I'm actually of the boat. I love the music for the most part. I think Fair and I have talked a little bit about how one of the things I loved about Final Fantasy VII OG was that the music in parts gets pretty creepy and like borderline horror in aspect. And in Remake, because of how big the songs got and like where video game music has come, like when they redid some of those songs, like the music is just not creepy at all anymore. And that's a bummer.
Yeah, it actually is. Like there are some songs I absolutely love. The battle themes are great, absolute bangers. The town themes are also great. The ones on the what's the thing with the discs you can buy on the potion machine?
Oh, like the little jukebox.
Yeah, the
jukebox. There, I love those renditions. They're a lot of fun. But yeah, I really, really miss the creepy vibe of the original.
Yeah, there's songs from Remake that like I have found my couple of songs, like when I'm in my car or I'm hanging out with my kiddo, like there are songs we have that are just straight, as you said, bangers. Like those songs, like just amazing, like so good. And I love whenever I listen to the soundtrack or if I'm playing the game, especially with those jukebox renditions, I can't help but feel like it was like, okay, somebody who loved Final Fantasy stepped in here and was like, I'm going to do every version or genre of like take this song from the OG and like put it in every different type of genre that I can think of and just remix it to like absolute hell and back. And those are like the different versions we got. And it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, but a lot of songs just how do I put this? They're like generic action movie songs. Like you see how people complain about the Marvel OSTs because they're generic. They're just actiony themes.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that. I can't remember a single theme from the game that isn't fight on, let the battles begin, and all that stuff.
From Remake?
Yeah, like for example, when there's Cosmo Canyon, Genova, One Winged Angel, it's amazing. But when it's something for the ambience, like when you're in, let's say, a dungeon, I can't recall anything.
I could kind of see that.
I know there was music. I just can't remember it.
I think as far as like the ambient when you're just kind of walking around, I think I'm going to agree with you, but there's two places where I can still remember the music. And it's when you're with Aerith after you find her from the church and you're going to her, or not even to her house, but the slums, and you get that remix of the, I don't know what song it is, but it's like,
yeah, I remember that one. I remember that one.
And then the insane music when you're in the expressway that's going off, like that music I can remember. And maybe it's the combat music and not the ambient music, but like that tech music that is playing when you're in the expressway that's collapsed with Aerith, I can remember that. But aside from that, I kind of agree with you. I actually can't really place any of the ambient music.
Yeah, sometimes I notice when they're using a leitmotif of another song, and it's amazing. Like you're listening to ambience music, and suddenly dun 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 dun. That's Hollow. And it's like, oh, nice. But you remember Hollow, not the song it's using Hollow as a leitmotif.
Okay, I can see that. And then Fair, how did you feel about the music with kind of like what we're talking about?
Well, I mean, as you know, Tyler, I have like zero musical aptitude, so I'm just kind of along for the ride. Usually when it comes to anything with music, I still prefer the OG soundtrack. I think that's just the nostalgia speaking. I did like a lot of, their the remixes or whatever you want to call it, the rewrites for the remake. I liked that music as well, but as its own piece, not as something to replace me listening to the OG soundtrack. So it's sort of like if I'm looking for something that's newer with actual instruments type of deal, I'm going to go listen to that. But if I want to listen to Final Fantasy VII music, I'm going to go put on that OG soundtrack. That's the Final Fantasy VII music that speaks to me. And the remake music doesn't leave as big of an impact on you, or I should say on me, as the originals did. And like the original is what I hum to myself, not the remake. And I don't know. I'm not really a music person.
That's actually a good point. You don't hum the remakes.
I will say that, at least for me, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, because when you fight the Valkyrie in Remake, the song that plays for the Valkyrie, I pretty positive it does not play anywhere else in OG, and it's very unique to Remake. And I would implore you to go back and listen to the song for the Valkyrie, because I hum that song to myself all the time. But
I'm pretty sure I don't even know what that song is.
Go listen to it. It's a banger. I love it. The greater point, which I actually agree with, is that for the most part, like the remake music is not as impactful as the OG music. And I agree with Fayer. Like there's times where I want the insanely layered instruments and like production value of the remake. There's certain songs from Remake that I'm just like, yes, I need this. But like, if I'm wanting that certain vibe, like that creepy vibe we were talking about, like I go right to the OG soundtrack. They exist for two different things, and I enjoy them in two different ways. And the remake music did not replace OG music at all.
Neither did the game. And it's not just nostalgia. I played the game for the first time 5 years ago. And those are bangers. Like I remember back then, I had the entire OST on my phone, and I just played it.
Like what's the cutoff for nostalgia? I mean, you first played it 5 years ago. Like how long in the past does that have to be before nostalgia takes over? Because what's the statute of limitations on that? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah, people just go, oh, you just hate Remake because you wanted it to be just like the original because you have nostalgia glasses. The original was just as good as this one. And it's like, no, they're completely different games.
I agree.
Yep, I agree.
I don't view the remake as the replacement for the original. I view it as something to be consumed and enjoyed separately, but never as a replacement.
Well, it's a meta sequel.
Yep, and that's actually I was going to bring that up as we transition into talking about the story.
Transition time.
Let's, in the effort of one, time, and two, jumping into the last big meaty thing. Let's talk about the story, because as you just said, Naitor, the remake, which many people thought was going to just be a remake, ended up being a meta sequel to the entire compilation, not even just the first game, but the entirety of the compilation, the books, the movie, Crisis Core, Dirge, all of it. We're getting a big meta sequel to everything, which was a surprise for many, including myself. So talk to us about, obviously they changed the story to accommodate this whole meta sequel path they are taking. Talk to us about how you felt about the story, the changes, how you feel about a meta sequel to begin with.
Okay, so talking about the story of the game, there were some parts I didn't remember completely from the original because it's been so long. So I was like, was this like this? And then, I noticed there were more character interactions, like with Jesse. But then things start changing a lot with the whispers and all that. Like, yeah, I know we weren't going to get a 1-to-1 conversion of the original because, of course, they did say that. But changes were way too big, and they occupied a huge portion of the game, like probably half even more than half, since it was just the first 5 hours or so stretched. So there were a lot of changes, and I'm a fan of a few, but I hate most of them.
So let's kind of rattle off some of the big ones. So obviously the whispers, even though the whispers were this mechanic about destiny, and there were, people argue that the whispers were kind of a metaphor for the audience going, no, the story needs to stay on the rails. There's been a lot of discussion about what the Whispers are and doing. But at the end of the day, as part of this meta sequel and the Whispers being a really big new thing, how did you feel about the Whispers?
I'm not a fan of them. Like, they're very Kingdom Hearts.
Okay.
So yeah, it ends up feeling like some Kingdom Hearts BS. And that's I don't want to point fingers, but it's a very Nomura and Nojima thing. They like to do these weird things with Kingdom Hearts. And now FF7.
Do you think the Whispers are gone? Because seemingly, at least from my perspective, we defeat Destiny at the end. Sephiroth shows up, which we'll get to. He absorbs the Whispers. We beat him, and then we see essentially these particles of like light fading and stuff like that. So to me, that speaks that the Whispers are gone, and I don't think they are coming back. Is that how you interpreted or read that? Are you worried the Whispers are coming back? Like how do you what do you think?
Well, considering they didn't cast Spectrum Patronus, I have no idea. But I think they're gone because they beat them. They escaped the Destiny from the original, but there will be huge repercussions in the story.
So it's funny because I am following them. Fayer and I have talked about this. We followed the marketing pretty closely leading up to part 1. And when we got part 1 and we realized that like while Midgar was bigger and the game was bigger and like they made like obviously with it being a modern game, like what was it? Sector 7 Slums was one screen, like with Tifa's Bar and all of that. It was literally just a screen. But like they obviously expanded on it. So it felt like a fully fleshed out town. But like aside from those things, you don't see a whole lot else to Midgar. And that was one of their big reasons why they talked about Midgar being just one part, because they really wanted to make the city feel bigger and show us more of it. But I felt like personally, you didn't really see more of it. That being said, a lot of the marketing and interviews post remake have said that from the devs and all of that, we should expect the story from here on out to largely follow what the original did, that we shouldn't see very many changes moving forward, which raises a lot of questions. But are you confident at their word? Do you not believe them? Like, what do you think in light of that information?
I was betrayed. I believe no one.
They have to earn that back.
Yeah. You talked about Midgard right now, and I'm going to forget about this later, so I'll say it right now. The original game had less, of course, because they were pre-rendered backgrounds on the PS1, but with less, it did a lot more than the remake.
Okay.
Midgard felt a lot more alive to me in the original compared to the remake. Even going back to it now, it feels more lived in, and that's because of abstraction. See, in remake they show you everything, but in the original you imply things. So, for example, your brain fills out everything. So, for example, there were a lot of rundown houses in the slums, and there were stories about people who went into houses and then disappeared because there's this monster that is a house that eats people. And in remake, it was just a boss. So that entire world building was gone.
Fayer and I have talked about this, but in remake, it's one of those where obviously being an older 97 game, like they got to do, I'm going to call it silly. And it's not really silly, but like I don't have a better word for it. But they got to have things like this Hell House. Well, then remake comes and remake it became too realistic. And then you have the consequences of it being realistic. And you're like, okay, would a house really be alive like this? We have to find a way to make the Hell House work realistically, which they didn't have to do in 7. And so they change it and like go a different direction on it. So yeah, I kind of see what you're saying with like abstract and stuff like that. Silent Hill is one of my favorite games. And there's so much in Silent Hill and all of it where a lot of the horror is the implied. It's the things that don't get explained in the game that you have to fill out with your head. And remake does try to explain everything.
Yeah, I get the house thing, but there are still horror stories that do stuff like that and they work. But sometimes they take it way too far. Like when you're in the dumpster with Aerith and there are these robot hands. In the original, they were just there in the background, and you could speculate on what they were. Maybe they were used to move things around. Maybe they belong to some huge mecha you could or not fight later, or from an era bygone. But now they have their own minigame with their tutorial to progress, and it's like, dude, just admit that your hallways are boring.
You just made me think of something, and it's like they obviously went this route of going, okay, well, like, let's look at these screens from the original. Oh, here is this robot hand on that screen. I wonder what it does and what it was for. Let's make an in-game reason for why these existed. And here's this puzzle. So like my brain immediately jumped to, you guys remember Bone Village where you're digging and there's the dinosaur skull and just a modern day airplane just hanging out in that skull? I want that explained. I hope they're like, they see a modern day airplane just sticking out of a dinosaur skull, and I'm ready.
Yeah, I remember
I'm
that.
ready for some shenanigan thing in Final Fantasy VII for why that's a thing.
Yeah, but one explanation I really, really liked is that potions are an energy drink.
Dude, I love that.
I
It makes
love
me
it.
want one. I want one so bad. Like that'd be such good merchandise. And
And by,
yeah.
by the end of all of Remake, they need to do that for marketing. They need like energy drinks as potions from Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Instead of them giving us something like that, they're selling us $4,000 watches or something. Like, who's asking for watches? Sell me a $5 energy drink called potion.
Or making
please.
us buy Butterfingers and Crunch Bars to get
yeah.
DLC codes. Like, no, just give us energy drinks that look
Sell
like
your
potions.
energy drinks with codes on them.
Yeah. Funny thing, I love how the save points were made into a bench brand. That's the only brand that isn't Shinra in the entire game.
I didn't
And
know
they
that.
just
That's
make
great.
benches.
Oh yeah, they had the same little like weird symbol that was on top of a save point on the back of the bench.
Yeah.
I never noticed that. I feel like an idiot. That's great.
Oh, really?
How'd you not notice that? It was like
I don't-
huge and glaring and staring
I
you in the
don't
face.
know.
Yeah.
Attention to detail is bad. It's not my strong suit. Anyway, so additional changes. Some of the, we touched on Whispers, some of the other big ones. Sephiroth shows up a lot in part 1. And Fair and I
Yeah.
talked about how, the logic for that is probably like, we're making a Final Fantasy VII game. This part 1 is a whole game. We can't have a whole game without Sephiroth in it. And, they're intellectually, we can go off all these reasons. But like, even if we were seeing glimpses of Sephiroth, it doesn't change the fact that Sephiroth came down on that highway and we had some big Advent Children level fight with Sephiroth. So how did you feel about Sephiroth, seeing him as much as we did and fighting him at the end, all of that?
Well, I'm not a fan of them changing the story so much, especially when Sephiroth with the Flames was in Nibelheim way later in the game, so that's kind of spoiled now. But it makes sense for the story they wanted to tell with the meta sequel thingy. But I hate that they did the final Sephiroth fight in this game. Like when he's shirtless at the end of FF7.
Oh, you're talking about like the singularity, like the edge of creation thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hate they did that in the first game. Like, why?
Yeah, I feel like we're definitely going to end up back there in other parts of the sequels. Like, we're not done with that. But
Yeah.
as a whole, it sounds like you understand, at least intellectually, with what them doing a meta sequel. It's like you could have lived with Sephiroth appearing the way he did, but like,
Yeah.
at the
It's like,
very
okay.
end, like those parts of Sephiroth, you were just like, why? This is too much.
Yeah, with the whole, I don't remember the name of the boss. Genova? Was it Genova parts? I think
What is it?
that
Genoma
meshed
Genova
into a
Dream?
dragon or something.
Oh, you're talking. Oh God, like something Bahamut. I don't remember. Like I forget what the little
Yeah,
parts
the
are
Bahamut.
called, but they turn into
Yeah.
Bahamut.
Yeah, that was some real, just wow. I don't know what to say about that. It's like,
Yeah, I would have. I think
Why?
I'm kind of thinking about it. Like I don't know about Fair, but like I obviously like with the story they were telling, I was like, okay, it makes sense that we're going off to fight the Harbinger and fighting the Whispers, like we are fighting Destiny. But then when we got, instead of it being like, okay, we're literally fighting the Harbinger or just like normal Whispers or like a flood of them, we got these ones that are like kind of representative of the Sephiroth, I don't know the correct term, but like the three Kadajan gang from Advent Children, and then they formed Bahamut, and it was like, okay, this particular part of how you're executing this, like, I'm a little lost on it. Like, why couldn't I just fight the Whispers on the Harbinger? But like, I'm getting some weirdness in here.
Yeah, it's like when your JRPG needs a final boss, so you slap in a false god and you have to fight it with the power of friendship. They needed a final battle on a cosmic scale like that, so they shoehorned this in to have that. I feel
it's 100% shoehorned in. It's this is something all the fans love. We have to make sure to include it.
Yeah, we can have a JRPG end without a mind-boggling battle.
I feel like if you want to do Easter eggs for the cronies from Advent Children, Kadaj and his gang, if you wanted to do an Easter egg for them or kind of acknowledge their presence in the compilation, like there was definitely a better way to do that, if that's what that was. Anyway, so other big changes. We talked with Sephiroth, we talked with Whispers. Character deaths is another one that gets talked about a lot. Obviously, we see Biggs survive at the end. Wedge, I'm going to just make the ballsy statement and say Wedge is alive, because I don't stand by the fact that just because he was pushed out of a window off screen that he's dead. There was no body. Like, he's not dead. Pretty confident Wedge is not dead. So Jesse, I'm going to go with dead. Biggs and Wedge are alive, though.
Yeah.
And we had that whole Barrett getting stabbed but didn't really die. You know, how did you feel about like the way they altered? A lot of people from the plate survived. I mean, I'm sure some people survived in the OG too, but Wedge was able to save a lot of people from the plate. How did you feel about that aspect?
Well, I'm curious as to what they're going to do with Biggs. But it's kind of like, what? Like, what's the purpose? I want to know. I'm
obviously
curious about that, but it felt shoehorned. Like, hey, you like this character? Looks like, what's the name of the guy from 2.5 Men?
Oh, which one?
Charlie Sheen?
Charlie Sheen. Looks a little bit like Charlie Sheen. You like that guy, huh? Well, we're bringing him back. Yay. I have no idea how he survived. And more importantly, why didn't the Whisper stop him from living?
So like, I was of the opinion that like maybe before we got the Yuffie DLC, that maybe we would see Yuffie and them save Biggs or something, and that would maybe explain why he survived. And Wedge surviving didn't bother me because you saw the whole progression for why Wedge didn't, even though he should have. Like, we see what happened to allow him to live. And so it was like, okay, but Biggs was literally like, oh, I legit thought he was dead, and then just smash cut to the end in a cutscene, and boom, he's not dead.
Yeah,
so like,
he legit died.
So I don't know. I kind of, that one was kind of a surprise, and not in a. We'll have to see what happens with why he's surviving. And then Fayer, before we dive into Zach, am I forgetting any other big changes or like things that like people typically kind of complained about with changes?
Jesse.
Jesse. Okay, sorry, you got something to say about Jesse. Go ahead.
It's Jesse. We forgot about Jesse.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing, and it's all tied up. So Remake has no idea what its target audience is, because it's made for, you can only enjoy it fully if you have played the original FF7 and know about the compilation, but it seems to be written for newcomers. So for example, from the beginning of the game, they throw around terms like Wutai, which you can only know if you play the original. And there are references to the original, like the Sephiroth scenes, the whole meta sequel thing. But Jessie is built up like a character for a newcomer. So you see her, you have her character development kind of with Cloud and all that stuff. You go to her house for pizza. You listen about her backstory with her parents, her hopes and dreams and all that stuff. And then she has a very tragic death, which you already knew it was going to happen. But the original game knew she was going to die, so it didn't waste time on her. She served her purpose. She was there, then she died. That's it. The remake has this whole segment of Jessie, but it's like it has no purpose at all.
I will say that while I kind of agree with you with that, like this whole like Jesse is a character that's written for like a newcomer, but there's so many different aspects to Final Fan or to the actual story where it's like you have to have some other tribal knowledge to really get the context. You know, like, okay, you can hear Wu-Tai and go, oh, that's some other place that Shinra's fighting, but you don't know what Wu-Tai is aside from that. But you, as a player, having played the OG, like you get that whole excitement. But especially, I have to agree with you with like the meta Sephiroth stuff. Like if you don't have context for Sephiroth or any of these other things, it's kind of confusing. And it's like, okay, like this is not written for like a newcomer. And I would even go so far as to say that's especially the case with Zack. And we'll get to Zack in a moment. But I did like the idea that we went up to Jesse's house and had that whole side thing with her because for a couple of reasons. One, I loved being able to see how the juxtaposition of seeing how people on the upper plate lived versus the people in the slums, because I felt like that was lacking in the OG. You got up to Shinra Tower and stuff, and you saw how the people in Shinra, like the actual Shinra corporation execs and suits were living, but seeing how the other people on the plate kind of lived was kind of nice. And I will stand by until I die. Her dad suffering from Mako poisoning and being bedridden, and then like Cloud going into that room and seeing him. And again, this goes back to the whole, like, if you've played the game, you get this knowledge and you have that foreshadowing. But like him looting around the room and looking at the dad and knowing that that is going to be what happens to Cloud. And that whole thing is just such great added foreshadowing and so poetic to me that I love it. I agree. A lot of people hate that chapter, but I love that one particular thing.
Yeah. That whole, how do people live in that section, and the whole foreshadowing is just great. I don't like that you have to sit through a whole mission with a few bosses, with Roach and the mechs and all that stuff. So it's like they had a great idea, but they still padded it out.
That is fair. That's Feyerbrand.
Oh God,
that's fair. Sack fair. What?
Oh God.
Hey, I did the thing.
So the last thing we're going to tackle is Zack. Episode's getting a little long, so we're gonna have to smash cut it at the end of this. But let's talk about Zack. How did you feel about that?
I was not expecting that, and I didn't get that spoiled.
Ooh.
Oh, I am very glad because you played it. I guess we didn't touch on this, but Naitor, you played Remake. By the time you actually sat down and played and beat it, it had been out for quite a long time. And I don't know if it's just because you weren't enjoying the game or whatever the case is, but it took you a while to beat it. And I think you even, correct me if I'm wrong, waited until you got a PS5 way later to even finish the game, correct?
Yeah, kind of. I didn't play it at launch because things were very slow here with the pandemic. So I needed to wait a few months, but I did get the deluxe edition and I started playing it. I finished the first mission like in one sitting all the way till chapter 3, I think, but it got really slow. And well, if a game doesn't keep me engaged that much, I won't be able to play it for long periods of time. So I end up going to other games. So that's why I took so long with FF7 Remake. It was very slow. It was boring. I wasn't enjoying it. So I would play a little bit every few weeks. And then they said, oh, look, there's a PS5 patch coming out and it's going to run at 60 FPS. So I was like, might as well wait. And then I finished it, but God, it was a slog.
Okay.
So yeah, I just finished it like a month ago, I think.
The greater point is that it's astonishing and impressive that you were able to avoid that spoiler, considering how long it took you to actually beat the game. But tell us what you thought about Zack surviving, seemingly. I mean, we don't really know 100% what's going on with Zack, and there's a lot of rampant speculation, and Fayer and I talked theories, but seemingly Zack is alive. How did you feel about that?
I'm very curious about it. Like, I need to know what they're going to do next. But I don't know yet if it's a good thing or a bad thing completely. Like, I already said I'm not a fan of them changing the story, but well, he's here, so Well, I like Zack, so it's like good seeing him, but I don't know what's going to happen with the story. I don't know if it's going to get worse. I don't know. It won't get better than the original at this point. I don't think. But I think it could be better than part one.
Yeah, I don't. And that's the one thing I try to avoid. Fayer and I have talked about this, is that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be its own thing. And I, as much as obviously it's a remake, so it's inevitable that we have expectations based off of the original and that we compare certain things. I do try to look at Remake as its own game, and I try to look at 7 as its own game. And so we've talked a lot about how it's so hard for us to judge how good this game is going to be, because this is just part one of however many, and they've got a clear vision that they are going for with the story. And it's like, we don't know how that's going to be executed. We just are seeing the beginnings of this. So until we see how it's all completed, it's hard to say whether or not these are good changes or bad changes for us. So much of our opinions are based off of fan theories that we've seen, that who knows if that's going to be like come to fruition. But one of the final things I want to ask you before I toss it to Fayer for any remaining questions is that, do you think that with how much you dislike Remake Part 1 and Intermission, do you think that the game can recover to become a better, more positive experience for you? And what do you think the game needs to do that?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'll just say this. Part 1 is one of the worst games I have ever played, and I don't want to touch that ever again. And at this point, I don't even know if I'm going to play the sequel.
Oh, wow.
Because it was just so painful to play, and I have never been so happy to uninstall a game from my PS5 or PS4. And I know that's harsh.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it was a huge letdown, and I didn't like whenever the game had a cutscene where they stuck to the original characters and how everything worked. It was amazing. It was the dream, like straight up the dream. But you had to play so much of that slog to get to those very small moments. So it's not worth it. And the game for me isn't worth the $60. I don't think, well, at least I hope part 2 isn't as bad as part 1 was. And I don't think it will be better than the original, but I think they can make a great game. Especially if it's a meta sequel, they can do some really insane things. And I hope they take advantage of that.
So you're hopeful? I was going to say, so you're hopeful, but not, convinced.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath. Especially with Nomura and what was his name?
I think Nojima is what you said.
Nojima. Especially with Nojimura.
Part 1 didn't give you a reason to be hopeful. You're just hopeful for the sake of you really want it.
Yeah,
but it sounds like you are open to it. Like you said you're not sure if you're going to buy it, but it sounds like you're going to check the trailers. You're going to be open to information. You're hopeful that you can be quote unquote sold on the future segments.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge FF7 fan. I actually want to get a tattoo, maybe of Fenrir or the Meteor. But so yeah, I need to see more. But I'm not exactly hyped about it.
They're like, Final Fantasy VII is so good, you want to see it, but we might give you a train wreck.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to Ever Crisis.
Oh, me too. It's gonna be good.
Same. All right, Fayer, do you have any final questions for Naitor?
I don't. I don't think I have anything. You pretty much covered it all.
All right. So before we talk us out, Naitor, tell everybody if they enjoy your hot takes. I know you have a ton of hot takes on your Twitter, as you are known for them. And if listeners are unaware, Naitor provides the artwork for our podcast. You can check it out at magusbrothers.com. The artwork on our podcast is his drawing, and he does great art transforming us into the Magus Brothers. But also he's just got great art in general. He's done quite a lot. check him out on his Twitter. Naitor, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Naitor. And what do you call the dash that's low?
The underscore?
_5. I do a lot of art with OCs and fan art of games. Persona, Zelda, The Last of Us, some Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, all that stuff.
And Naitor does take commissions occasionally, so keep an eye on his Twitter if you like his art. Links to his Instagram and Twitter will be in the episode description. Aside from that, Feyer, tell everybody where they can find you.
Y'all can find me at Feyerbrand on pretty much everything. YouTube, Twitter. I'm starting this new thing on Instagram here shortly. And my Twitch has been reactivated. I'm Feyerbrand on there. I still haven't found a home yet for my streaming, flip-flopping between Twitch and YouTube. But my Twitch is now reactivated, and you can find me, Feyerbrand, at everything. I'm the only person with that name.
And if you're enjoying the podcast, please like, share, subscribe, review us. Those reviews on Apple iTunes mean a lot to the algorithm. Tell a friend, talk about us on social media. And if you are enjoying what we're doing, check us out at magusbrothers.com. Links to our socials are there, as well as where you can listen to the podcast. And next episode, we will be joined by Kuta Kuma. He is the voiceover for a lot of the Cosmo Canyon Observatory. He will be joining us to talk about why he loves the remake. And it'll be a nice little juxtaposition to this episode. And until then, everybody have a great one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.